Catherine Hall spent more than 15 years working in the pharmaceutical industry developing new drugs. And in that time, she started experiencing terrible pain in her wrists.
Part of it was pipetting and typing, and maybe it was carpal tunnel syndrome. And I would go from, like my general internist all the way up to, a neurologist to try and address this. I was on all kinds of pain meds and, steroid, all kinds of stuff. Nothing was working. And I had a friend who kept saying, why'd you just try acupuncture? And I'm like, why would I do acupuncture? That's, no.
Today, Catherine is the Senior Vice President for Research and Programs at the New York Academy of Medicine. But many years ago, when doctors told her that she would need surgery, Catherine wanted to avoid it. So she gave acupuncture a shot.
What's a couple needles compared to surgery? And so I go to this acupuncturist who was this, older woman who literally got on the table and put a needle in my arm. And this pain shot through my arm and my wrist that was almost like I wanted to scream.
But after that, the pain that Catherine had experienced for years was gone. So did the acupuncture work when the pain medication hadn't? Or had Catherine experienced the famous placebo effect? Welcome to Tiny Matters. I'm Deboki Chakravarti, and I'm joined by my co-host, Sam Jones. Today, we're talking about the placebo effect. If you're a regular listener, you may remember that a few months ago, we chatted with David Jones at Harvard University about the history of clinical trials. And we kicked off the episode with a fake exorcism.
Who can forget fake exorcisms?
Right, we'll always remember.
Yes.
And we also talked a little bit about placebos in that episode, but we realized there was still a lot more to unpack. I know I've had experiences like Catherine where I'm like, did this medicine work or did I just experience the placebo effect? The idea of the placebo effect is just so pervasive, and I've been really curious about how doctors use placebos in clinical trials. So we're back with the sequel of sorts to talk more about how placebos shape medicine and the important challenges and opportunities the placebo response creates in healthcare overall. First, let's define the placebo effect. Here's Charlotte Blees, an associate professor at Uppsala University in Sweden.
The placebo effect is a genuine psychobiological effect that can arise when you expect a treatment or an intervention or even a clinician to be effective. And as a result of that expectation, you have genuinely beneficial therapeutic effects.
When researchers are studying the efficacy of a new treatment, it's important for them to factor the placebo effect into their results. Is the participant feeling better because of a new drug that's helping their symptoms? Or is it because they think they're getting a new drug that's helping their symptoms? To figure this out, clinical trials compare the real treatment to fake treatments, i.e. placebos. Here's Catherine again.
So if, for instance, a treatment was in the form of a pill, it would be a pill that was created in the same shape and color and size as the pill that you were going to be testing.
In the context of a clinical trial, the response that participants have to the placebo is called, aptly, the placebo response. And it's important to note that the placebo response is not the same thing as the placebo effect, which is that specific psychobiological effect of getting the fake treatment. The placebo response is basically the grand total of how participants are responding, both because of the placebo effect and everything else that's part of being in a clinical trial.
They may respond in a way that's different because when people are under scrutiny, they may behave slightly differently as well. So they might be changing something in their routine because they're in a clinical trial, no matter what side they're in. The passage of time can affect just how people respond. So some people are going to get better anyway, or their symptoms are going to change. That's why we need controls, because even if you're receiving a treatment, you may have some of this undifferentiated response stuff going on. And that altogether is called the placebo response.
There's a popular image of placebos as a simple sugar pill, but there's a lot of work that actually goes into making them. The placebo has to look and possibly taste like the original treatment. You have to try and offer it in the same way, maybe even down to the attitude of the clinician who is giving the treatment. There was a story that David told us when we talked to him about clinical trials that didn't make it into that episode, but it really illustrates just how detailed placebo design is. He was telling us about a surgical procedure called vertebroplasty to treat spinal arthritis or osteoporosis. The treatment involves injecting a concrete-like substance into the bones to reinforce the vertebrae.
And surgeons thought it was great, the best thing ever. And so someone said, well, not so fast, we should do a sham-controlled trial.
Designing a sham shouldn't have been difficult. It mostly involves sticking a needle into the bone.
But what they realized is that the stuff that gets injected has a very particular odor. It's like a nail polish remover kind of smell. And so everyone who's actually getting the stuff injected will have that smell. And they were afraid that if you did the operation with a sham with no odor, people would guess that nothing had been done to them.
So they figured out a way to mimic that smell to create a sham that was as close to the real treatment as possible. And they found that the sham did just as well as the actual procedure, which is not so uncommon.
You go into a clinical trial, phase 1 to make sure it's safe, phase 2 to find out what the right dose is, and phase 3 to demonstrate its efficacy. After you do all that, and I was in pharma doing all that, to have this thing called the placebo response beat your drug that you have an exquisite mechanism of action, you've done all this work on, that blew my mind.
Honestly, this blows my mind as well. So the stakes for designing the right placebos for clinical trials are high. A lot of work and often millions of dollars goes into developing treatments before they even make it to clinical trials. And if you don't have a well-designed placebo, you might completely miss the actual effect of the real treatment. And patients are giving their time and health to this work, with many more waiting to find out the results. And also, for the researchers designing these treatments, being defeated by a placebo is understandably frustrating.
What makes placebos and the placebo response even more challenging is just how mysterious it is. We know that placebos are more effective with certain medical conditions. Catherine told us that she likes to divide conditions into 2 buckets, and the first are those that have subjective symptoms, including pain.
So, irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, is a condition where you have a lot of gastrointestinal pain and bloating, diarrhea, constipation, basically a lot of symptoms in your gastrointestinal tract. That condition has a very high placebo response. Migraine has a high placebo response. Depression, major depressive disorder, even conditions like epilepsy and schizophrenia have notable placebo response, as does Parkinson's.
And then in the other bucket are what Catherine describes as diseases of replication, where placebos seem less effective.
A disease of replication in my head is a virus, which is going to replicate independent of what's happening in your brain. A bacterial infection. Bacteria really don't care what you're thinking or what you're expecting. They have their own agenda. And similarly, cancer, I think, is a disease of replication where your cells have gone rogue and they're just replicating on their own. And whatever the brain is thinking or doing or perceiving has very little impact on those diseases of replication.
Scientists are still untangling the exact mechanisms that drive the placebo effect, but there are some theories that conditioning could play a role.
That means if I were to give somebody, and this has been done, and this is this one I love, like a sweet, sugary, pink drink with an immunosuppressant, I would condition them every time they got the sweet, sugary drink, pink drink with the immunosuppressant, to the point that when I take out the immunosuppressant and just give the sweet sugary drink, you still get immunosuppressed. So there's a way that you can consciously, through expectation, and unconsciously through conditioning, induce placebo effects.
Again, that's wild.
Totally. But thinking about clinical trials, not everyone who's in the control arm of a trial actually experiences the placebo effect. Some people don't respond to the sham treatment.
And so one of the things that a lot of clinical trialists would love to know is who is going to respond to placebo, and can I either move them out of the clinical trial and study them in a different way, or do an analysis that takes into account how people responded to placebos that goes beyond the basic subtract the drug outcome from the placebo outcome, and that's the effect of the drug.
For example, there are genetic traits that seem to be associated with patients experiencing the placebo response. But Catherine noted that there's no one main gene involved, and we don't know how these traits actually drive the placebo response in patients.
It's hard to tease it apart. And, obviously it would really call for a great deal of investment in research. But I think the interest is much more in let's get these drugs developed to treat patients.
Scientists are also looking beyond genetics at other traits, like if people have certain personality types or brain morphologies, are they more likely to respond to placebos? There are also researchers using machine learning to combine a variety of traits to see if they can predict a person's placebo response.
And then there are the folks that have basically used machine learning to combine different types of psychological, genetic, and neurological traits or states to try and predict placebo response. The problem is the reproducibility. It's just not there.
But it's not only the patient we need to focus on. In fact, scientists have found that the clinician plays an important role in the strength of the placebo response or effect. A study from the lab of Ted Kapchick at Harvard tested different levels of engagement coming from an acupuncturist. At the lowest level, you had very minimal interaction with the acupuncturist. At the next level up, there was an acupuncturist placing needles. And at the top intervention, the clinician would still be placing needles, but they would also be making sure to have a warm, caring interaction with the patient.
The clinician would listen to the patient's problem, have a moment of thoughtful reflection and silence, physically touch the patient, express concern about the condition, and also, reflect something about the treatment. That was the most potent placebo.
And that brings us to another important and more historical use of placebos that is not an exorcism. In the doctor's office.
Back in the day, when a physician or a doctor or somebody who was trying to take care of another person just didn't have anything else, they would fashion a bread pill, which I guess is basically the same thing, ostensibly, as a inert treatment, but they knew it had no active treatment value, but they gave it to patients because they had nothing else to give.
Doctors still do this today. I mean, not the bread pill, to my knowledge, but instead they will offer injections of saline or prescribe antibiotics for viral infections. I knew about the first of those, but giving people antibiotics for viral infections is interesting, and I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's a little complicated.
Yeah, Charlotte told us that they sometimes do it because they're at a loss for what else to do, or because the patient just wants a treatment.
But one of the other reasons that doctors say, and we've done some qualitative interview research on this, they say that because they think it might have an effect, it could be a placebo effect.
This practice is understandably controversial. It basically boils down to trying to trick the patient into feeling better. I would hate it if I felt like my doctor was lying to me. This is like PsyCom 101. Don't lie to people about the science or about their health.
I just want honesty. I want to be able to be I want to know that I've been given the information I need.
Yes, agreed. And just to make communication even more confusing, there's a flip side to all of this. With the placebo effect, the expectation that you're going to get some benefit from a treatment seems to be incredibly powerful. But expectation can also shape the likelihood that you'll experience negative effects from a treatment. This is called the nocebo effect.
So it could be that a clinician tells you there could be side effects associated with this treatment and goes into great detail about what those are, or tells you something like 80% of people experience some side effects, in which case you might think, oh my God. And you actually, as a result of that negative expectancies, you might start to feel some of those side effects.
And where you've really seen striking results or interesting findings with nocebo effects is in clinical trials. What we see is that most, if not all, of the side effects that you see in the placebo arm of a clinical trial are associated with the information that you got when you entered the trial. So if you're told, like, you might, like I said, have headaches, nausea, vomiting, those are the side effects that you see in the placebo arm of trials.
I hadn't heard of the nocebo effect before.
I hadn't either. This was new terminology to me.
Right, but I feel like looking back, and I'm curious if you've had the same thing, Sam, there are times where I feel like I've experienced something like this.
I would bank on it. Yeah.
Right. And when we talked to Charlotte, she described an experience that actually I think a lot of us had. It was probably very momentous to a lot of us. This was getting her first COVID shot.
I'm so delighted to be able to get it. But the nurse said to me, she was highly specific, and she said, 12 hours from now, you may experience a headache, shivering. She went into this whole laundry list of things. And I remember looking at my watch, and 12 hours later, I really didn't feel great and had to take some painkillers. But I did wonder at the time, could that have been nocebo effects?
And I bet a lot of us have similar stories, whether it's from the COVID shot or some other medical situation. And these examples raise a lot of tricky questions about how doctors should be communicating with us. On the one hand, we need to know about possible adverse effects, but the knowledge of those adverse effects can also contribute to them happening. The answer might be in figuring out how to frame these symptoms so that people can have the right mindset going into a treatment.
So it could be you tell patients, look, if you start to feel some kind of negative symptoms, that's a sign the treatment's working. Is that actually a sign the treatment's working, or is it just side effect? But that actually helps people to adhere to treatments and manage those effects. And I think it's sort of good negative effects as opposed to lousy negative effects, in which case they say, I'm not going back to that doctor, I don't want to take any more of that pill, which really could lead to secondary harms.
Spirits is a history and comedy podcast focused on everything folklore, mythology, and the occult, told through the lens of feminism, queerness, and modern adulthood. Every week, mythology buff Julia and her childhood best friend Amanda get together to learn about a different story from mythology and folklore over drinks. That's everything from deep dives into the pantheons of ancient Greece, Arthurian legend, and the Norse gods, to modern urban legends, to a roundup of vampire stories from around the world. Start listening with any of the almost 500 episodes that they've released over the last 10 years. There's so much to enjoy, whether you're here for analyses of mental health in mythology or creepy modern ghost stories. Dive in at spiritspodcast.com or search for Spirits wherever you download your podcasts. That's Spirits from the Multitude Podcast Collective.
When I was talking to Catherine, this whole conversation led me to what felt like kind of a silly question. In the time that you've spent working on the placebo and studying placebos, do you think of placebo effect as good, bad, both? And I know that's a really simplistic way of thinking about that, but I'm curious how you see the placebo effect.
I think placebo effects are underappreciated. I think that we have ignored them and marginalized them and inadvertently leveraged and used them. And what I mean by that is that there's so many drugs nowadays that if you put them in a clinical trial today, they would fail. Why they passed back then, it's hard to say. I mean, there's quite a bit of evidence that the differential between drug and placebos has decreased over time. I don't think our drugs are getting worse. I think our drugs are probably getting better. Our placebo responses are probably getting bigger as well as the expectation increases.
Yeah, I'm curious, when you're saying that, one of the things I was wondering is our expectation, we know, the placebo response is a thing that's a part of our daily vocabulary. Is the placebo response, is our knowledge of it also something that elicits the placebo response? We're I know that the placebo response is a thing, so I think even taking the sugar pill will make me feel better.
Well, you hit the key point of this whole thing, right? Think about it. And I love that this is such an interesting kind of ethical conundrum where for many years, researchers felt like you couldn't give a placebo, it wouldn't work if people knew it was a sugar pill. So there was a need to have a deception or deceive the patient, which would erode the patient's autonomy. So basically, there was no way you could give somebody a placebo because it was unethical, it was bad. We can't give placebos, even though in study after study after study, the data is there to say how much better the patients did. I mean, there are studies where the placebo response endures for months and years after you've given somebody a placebo. And yet we still are ignoring it. So here's the thing. What the open label placebo people have done is they've said, well, if expectation is a key driver and information is a key driver, why don't you just tell people the truth? Tell them that placebos work 74% of the time. And so there's a likelihood that you could respond. Let's see what happens.
Open label placebos are the opposite of the deceptive placebos we've come to associate with blinded clinical trials or doctors giving a bread pill to pacify a patient back in the day. Here's Charlotte again.
In an open label placebo situation, you may be giving them the same treatment. It could be a sugar pill in this case, but you're saying this has no active ingredients, but I still think it might make you feel better. And so that has been described as an open label placebo because you still think that there could be placebo effects as a result of doing that, but you're not deceiving the patient. So those studies have had a lot of attention because it seems that you can, which seems highly counterintuitive, give people a placebo openly without deceiving them, and you'll still get an effect.
I had no idea, and I feel like I keep saying this. This is me on loop the whole episode. I had no idea. But of course, there's still a big question mark around whether patients are willing to take open label placebos. And given the importance of the medical practitioner's demeanor and rapport with the patient, Charlotte pointed out to us that there's still some level of deception with open label placebos.
Because it's not the pill. If you're really going to be sort of candid about it, you might say, look, I'm going to talk to you in a particular way. That's actually going to have an effect. It's not this little pill. So is that relevant that you need to tell people that? I don't know. Could be.
It all gets very meta very quickly, and it also taps into larger questions about how healthcare is delivered. Over and over again, one of the key factors that seems to drive the beneficial aspects of the placebo response, or potentially mitigate the negative aspects of the nocebo response, is the level of attention and care that patients get from their doctors. And I don't know about all of you, but while I have had doctors who are warm and caring, many of my interactions with the medical system have been frustrating. And I don't know if I can entirely fault doctors because I know the system they're operating in isn't centered around building good rapport with patients.
The modern day clinical encounter is being driven by a totally different metric. It's how many patients can you get through? So reduce it to the minimum, which is 15 minutes, and really just focus on what the presenting condition. Don't go talking about the family or the relationship with the partner, or if diet is important in this context, talk about diet. But it's kind of fascinating that in our healthcare system, where the thing that is healing is most important, the emphasis is put on the drug that can't even beat the placebo effect, right? So I think we're kind of setting ourselves up, not just for health inequities, but across the board for poor health outcomes.
And these issues can further exacerbate systemic inequities. For example, Catherine told us that in situations where the physician is white and the patient is of color, some of the key factors that can drive a positive response to treatment might be missing.
And this is just a generalization. It's certainly not true 100% of the time. But I think a significant percent of the time, there's low trust. There is less attention paid. There is this business of judging, not adherence. And there's less physical touching. And there are assumptions that are certainly negative, like this patient just wants pain meds because they're using. And so all of those I would put in the camp of nocebogenic, or nocebo-producing treatments.
And alongside people's frustrations with healthcare, there's been a rise in people turning to AI chatbots like ChatGPT to ask questions about their health. It's easy to access and feels anonymous in a way that can make people want to disclose more of their personal information. And the voices of these chatbots are meant to appeal to us.
One of the issues with chatbots is they tend to be people-pleasing. So they're very compelling. So the way that they talk, the fluency of the tools, and the fact that they are quite polite and can be very impressively empathetic, is no denying it. Those are likely to be vehicles of placebo effects. And potentially, if you go down the rabbit hole of side effects or whatever it may be, you could be augmenting the nocebo effects as well.
But like all things AI, the use of these chatbots for health issues comes with a whole host of complications. On the one hand, yes, it's amazing for people to be able to access information. And if the information they get can help them make useful decisions or even just experience a positive placebo effect, then I guess you could say that's hard to root against.
But then that's mixed with the issue of, is the information as high quality? There's no point in having a boost in placebo effects if you're being told a load of rubbish online. In the States, people who are uninsured, minoritized groups, younger people are much more likely to turn to chatbots. And if there's harms associated with these tools, those populations are going to be most effective. To add a layer of complexity, doctors are using these tools as well, and they're also using them to write documentation that patients will read. So we've got a kind of situation of a shadow health system in operation in many ways.
Oof, it's hard to not feel a little anxious about that. So understanding how people use chatbots in their healthcare and untangling the way that these interactions are manifesting in placebo or nocebo effects is going to be important to make sure these tools don't become exploitative. And that's forcing the science of placebos to evolve as well. Charlotte told us about Therabot, a recent therapy chatbot that has been published in the New England Journal of Medicine AI.
But they didn't even have a placebo control. It was just a therapy bot versus telling people you're on a wait list. So there are concerns. There's a lack of placebo control literacy a lot of the time. And I'd say something is a bit pedantic. It can seem tedious, but it's necessary to do the work.
That brings us back to our story at the beginning of the episode, where Catherine was dealing with wrist pain and as a last-ditch effort to avoid surgery, decided to go to an acupuncturist. Remember, after the appointment, years of pain had more or less vanished.
I was like, what was that? Was that acupuncture? Was that the placebo effect? And if it was a placebo effect, why wouldn't I had a placebo effect when I was taking the Tylenol plus codeine, like all these other drugs that were so powerful? Like, why wouldn't I had a placebo effect before? And I really became interested in what that was and started to study it.
Yeah, do you feel like you ever got to an answer to those questions?
I don't have a definitive answer because I think it was a little bit of both. Which is, I think, the key problem in clinical trials is that it's really hard to tease apart what's the placebo effect in the context of the placebo response compared to the drug response. It's very hard to figure it out.
Yeah, so Deboki, like you said earlier, it all gets very meta very quickly. There's still so much we have to learn about the placebo effect. But I also didn't realize how much there is that we do know, whether it's about the importance of expectations or the fact that you can still experience the placebo effect from open label placebos. And who knows, maybe what we learn about placebos in the next few years will have a positive effect on how people access medical care in the future.
Yeah, like the placebo effect is this thing that I feel like we sometimes talk about as if it's fake. But my big takeaway from this is that it's incredibly real. And the more we understand it, the better our medicine will be.
All right, Tiny Show and Tell. Deboki, I would love to go first if possible, because I found something that could not be more related to this episode, and especially the ending of this episode.
Awesome. Let's hear it.
Okay. So I want to tell you about a study published in the International Journal of Clinical and Health Psychology. It's about placebos.
Cool.
And not only that, it's about open label placebos.
Perfect.
So the research was on the use of placebo to help with healthy aging in older adults. So the researchers, what they did was they recruited 90 healthy older adults, and then they randomly assigned them to one of three groups. Group 1, no treatment. Group 2 did receive placebo pills, but they were told the pills contained active ingredients that were designed to improve their well-being and physical function. Group 3 received those same inactive placebo pills, but they were told that they were placebos. So open label.
Yeah.
And they were told they were placebos, but that they could still trigger beneficial mind-body responses. So, right. 3 weeks pass, and then the participants are given objective tests like measuring short-term memory, selective attention, and physical performance. Also given questionnaires where they report, their stress levels and well-being, sleepiness, fatigue, other things that are like, in the press release, they're like other stereotypical things related to aging. And so here's something that I think is kind of wild, but probably less so after someone has listened to our episode. Because if I had just read this and hadn't been thinking about placebos, I would have been like, hold on.
Right.
What is happening? But now, it's still kind of nuts to think about sometimes, but we have a bit more context. But right, so after 3 weeks, so the participants who knowingly took placebo pills experienced lower stress than the control group, but also the deceptive placebo group, which I thought was fascinating. So the open label participants did even better than the ones who were told, like, here's something that has some active ingredients that can help you, which I thought was fascinating. They also showed significant improvement in short-term memory compared to the control. So still the people who received the more traditional placebo, not the open label, they still did better in terms of cognitive performance, but nothing...
You mean better compared to people who didn't get the treatment?
So they did better. The people who got the placebo, not the open label, but like the placebo, where they were told, hey, this has active ingredients in it, they did better than both of the other groups.
Okay.
But not by a lot.
Interesting.
But still, I think the thing that hit me the most was that the ones who took the open label placebo pills reported lower stress than either of the other groups, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah, overall, the trend was that a lot of benefits were found with the open label placebo, and it wasn't vastly different from the placebo, the traditional placebo, and it was significantly better than the control.
Yeah.
Which I just was like, I was thinking, it's going to be almost the same as the control, or it's going to be so minimal compared to the control. Like being told, hey, this is a placebo, and we think it's going to help you, but it's a placebo, and still having it really help people, apparently, after 3 weeks. Again, it's one study, but I still thought it was really fascinating. And so the whole idea behind this was that, maybe using open label placebos could be a strategy for supporting healthy aging in people.
Yeah.
Yeah, no deception there. Just really fascinating stuff.
Totally. Yeah. It's so cool.
And when I saw it pop up, like the press release literally came out today. So the article was published a couple months ago, but for whatever reason, the press release was just published today.
They just got around to it.
And I was like, wait, hold on. I didn't even look for it. It was like, just
the universe knew.
Aligned.
Yeah. Well, I have a tiny show and tell that's actually, it's not placebo related, but it is still kind of related to what you were talking about.
Okay.
It's about cognitive decline. And specifically, it's about cognitive decline in patients with HIV. This is like very early stage research, but I thought it was really interesting and exciting, and I hope it goes somewhere. So one of the things about HIV is like treatments have come a long way, which also like one of the great things about that is that it means that people are living longer with it. But one of the issues is that HIV seems to accelerate aging, and that leads to things like cognitive decline, but we don't know completely why this happens. Right. And so one thing that people think might be involved are these sugar molecules called glycans, which are found around our body.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they do is they keep our inflammation in check. But as we get older, our glycan levels go down. So it's at a like steady rate for males, and then there's like a sudden dip for females who hit menopause. There was a study in 2024 that found people with HIV experienced that loss in glycan at a younger age compared to those without HIV. And it seemed to be related to this increase in an enzyme that degrades glycans. And so they also found that, like, with these people, they were experiencing an increase in inflammation. So it suggests that this might be part of the mechanism that's like involved in driving the cognitive decline, or at least that those pieces are there. We just don't know if they're all fully connected.
Right.
So for this study, researchers looked at blood samples from patients with HIV, and they found that those who had more cognitive impairment also had a greater loss in glycans. And they found a similar pattern in mice infected with HIV. So suggesting again, like maybe this is like part of what's going on. And so it like supported the idea that like this glycan-based mechanism is involved with cognitive decline. But the other great thing, not just from like an understanding the process, is that it actually opens up the pathway for certain treatment options, and specifically with using Tamiflu.
What?
The way that Tamiflu usually works is it blocks enzymes that split sialic acid, which is a glycan that's important for suppressing inflammation. And they found in mice that the drug helped preserve sialic acid, and they also found that it improved their cognition. So this is like all very, very proof of concept, but it does seem to reinforce that glycans are important to HIV-related cognition loss. It doesn't mean that we can necessarily use drugs to like block it, like the flu drug, the Tamiflu, to like solve this problem. But it does suggest like maybe this will be a pathway we can look at more in the future.
Huh. That's so interesting. I feel like glycans are really, really cool. And I know so little about, like, I feel like I was very focused on like DNA, RNA, and I wasn't thinking about sugars, but they're so important. They're so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's really cool glycan research, and this seems like it could be super valuable to understand.
I agree. I think it's like really cool to like realize just how many more like molecules than there are than just like the ones you like focus on in school. And just like how much potential there is when we look beyond that.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Tiny Matters, a podcast brought to you by the American Chemical Society and produced by Multitude. This week's script was written by me and edited by Michael David and by Sam, who is also our executive producer. It was fact-checked by Michelle Boucher. Our audio engineer is Misha Stanton. The Tiny Matters theme is by Michael Simonelli and the Charts and Leisure team.
Thanks so much to Catherine Hall and Charlotte Blees for joining us. Go rate and review us wherever you listen. We would super appreciate it. Also, if you have episode ideas, feedback, whatever it may be, email us tinymatters@acs.org. And we'll see you next time.